Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Seth Meyers, clinical psychologist, and I have the podcast Insight with Dr. Seth. Today, in this insight tip, I'm just going to talk briefly about one personality characteristic that can actually cause a fair amount of problems in an interpersonal relationship that you have. So, that is getting defensive. When you are in a relationship with someone who has a tendency to get defensive, it can make things very difficult and tense to bring up anything that maybe is something that you need to talk about, something that you need to deal with. It makes life much more difficult if the other person gets defensive. So you can't actually talk about what the root issue is. So, first, let's talk about the kinds of relationships you could be in where someone gets defensive. It could be someone at work, it could be a coworker, it could be a boss. In your personal life, it could be a family member, someone you live with. It could be an extended family member. It could be a close friend or a romantic partner. In all of these relationships, there may be times when things come up and you need to address it. You maybe want to hold someone accountable for something or run something by someone and say, hey, this bothered me. I need to talk about this. Please don't do this again. If the other person gets defensive, has that personality characteristic as a pattern, it can really be very difficult. And unfortunately, there really aren't solutions that are able to be identified in the discussion if someone becomes defensive. Ultimately, getting defensive is not a solution that works in relationships. And we'll talk more a little bit about that in a minute. First, I just want to talk about how do you identify when someone has gotten defensive. So there are a few different ways that a person can show that they have gotten defensive. They may verbally attack you or make verbal attacks against you in some way. They may really quickly and really angrily, very defensively, turn the tables, flip something back on you, say something very quickly, very negatively, so that you understand they are not happy about what you said. They do not accept it. And in fact, they quickly form a defense and turn it against you. That's one way that a person may become defensive. Another way is just to completely deny whatever it is that you are bringing up with them. They may say things like, I never said that. I never did that. That never happened. Just complete denial of what you are bringing up. And then another way that a person shows defensiveness is to simply lie. A lot of times, an individual may lie and they may even come up with something or fabricate a lie just to defend themselves against what you're saying because they really don't accept what you're saying. Those are all really difficult situations. And if you are the person who's trying to bring something up with the defensive person, you're sort of left feeling completely confused because you're not sure then, well, what do I do? What do I do if the person doesn't even acknowledge that they said or did this in the first place? What do I do if they get so frustrated and angry and twist it back on me that then we can't even talk about it, right? So you can feel in those situations like there's nowhere to go from here. What am I supposed to do? And what's really unfortunate and sad about the situation is if the other person in that moment gets really defensive, guess what doesn't happen? You don't end up seeing eye to eye. Each person in that dynamic doesn't feel listened to, doesn't feel appreciated. There's no compromise. There is no working through the problem. And, all of us probably know intuitively problems in interpersonal relationships, whether they are at work or at home or out in our social lives. Problems don't magically just go away. Problems between people, especially when problems have become a pattern with people, they don't just disappear. Problems really often require working through two people talking about them, each person hearing about how the other feels, and each person saying, hey, I am willing to make some of these changes because this relationship is important to me, because I want this relationship to be successful. Some of the relationships that you have in life are voluntary, you choose them. And yet, the reality is, a lot of the relationships that we have in life are involuntary. We are in relationships with people that are simply a part of the system that we are in, whether that's at work and we don't choose who we work with usually, or at home, family members that are blood relatives that are just simply a part of your family. So, really, when it comes to relationships, constant flexibility, constant adaptation, constant compromise is really what is required for successful relationships. And here's a question to think about: why do people want relationships to be successful? You may think for a moment, well, I don't like so and so. I don't like that person. I don't want to have a successful relationship with that person. But actually, when you have tense interactions with individuals, when you have problems with individuals, actually, there is a toll and a cost it takes on you. You feel your stress level go up. It can impact your mood negatively. It serves our purposes best, even if it's someone that we would say, I don't really like them. It serves us best to figure out how to make that relationship successful. We want that relationship to be successful ultimately, because relationships that are successful are more harmonious, they are less stressful. It is less about, I'm going to win and they're going to lose. It is less of a fight, there is less conflict. Conflicts and fights and arguments and tension, all of it takes a lot of energy. It is just burning up energy. And so successful relationships, even when you really don't like a person, actually are the real goal: to keep things harmonious and peaceful so that you can actually just do what you need to in that interaction with that person, and then go out and live your life and have the closeness with relationships that you actually do really like and are positive. I want to take a moment and also just acknowledge what happens when the other person, and you try to bring things up, becomes defensive. So, what is really going on when the individual becomes defensive? I gave some examples about ways that a person may get defensive, right? They may lie, they may just be in complete denial, they may flip things back on you. Those are the ways that a person may become defensive with you. What is the overall goal of the defensive person in that moment? Why does a person become defensive? Now we understand what they do, the ways it can look, but why? Why do they do it? They do it, the person becomes defensive basically to get you to back off. This overall is an avoidance technique. They hear what you say, they know what you want them to do. They know you want to talk about something, to address something, that you want to confront an issue, and they do not want to do that. Not only do they not want to do it, they really will not do it. The way that the person becomes defensive is the way they show you they will not have a peaceful conversation about it. The sort of message they send is, this is not just going to be like some nice two-way conversation where you talk to me about how you feel or about how you want me to change or how I made you feel. They don't want to do that. And in fact, it's kind of strange when you think about it, because you may be thinking, well, in any relationship, there are times when people upset each other. Sometimes we have to talk about things. The person who gets defensive with you as a pattern, they don't ever really want to talk about issues. If there was a checklist of boxes and they filled out the things they don't want to do in a relationship, one of the very first things on their checklist would be not talk about issues. That's what they would check in box number one. It's not something defensive personalities want to do. The problem is, it is a part of relationships. So, working through issues, compromising on issues, this is an area of that person's life where they really need a little help. This is an area of the person's life, of the person's personality, where they tend to have difficulties, and probably not just with you, but with others. There is something that is missing if an adult is not willing in a relationship where collaboration is required. There is something missing if the other person simply won't do it. And we'll talk before the video ends about some kind of techniques that you can try to use with that person in the situation. But what is most important is that you understand talking about the issues is not something that they want to do. And this is a huge, giant avoidance technique to get you to back off so they don't have to talk about it, so you don't hold them accountable to this particular issue. Think for a moment, do you think that getting defensive is a good way to cope for anyone? Do you think that that is a solution that works really well? I can share with you that getting defensive is not a solution in an interpersonal conflict because getting defensive is impulsive. It is impulsive behavior. It is very quick. It is often not thought through. Things that are impulsive are about doing what feels good or easy in that moment, but things that are impulsive don't think about what is good overall. So maybe something you're thinking works for right now, for this moment, but later it starts a bigger problem. So, for example, a person can get defensive with you and not want to talk to you about an issue. They can get really defensive. You feel more frustrated. There was no solution. And in fact, the frustration and resentment that you may feel towards that defensive person just accumulates. This is just one more episode that causes you to feel even more resentful. So, see, it's not a winning solution for anyone to become quickly defensive. It is impulsive and it's usually very emotional. When someone gets defensive, the emotion volume button gets turned up so high. And usually, when we go into over emotional reactions, our fight or flight reaction has kicked in. And really, we are not using oftentimes our best judgment. We are not thinking about collaborating. We are not thinking about this relationship is important to me to keep it peaceful. No, we are in fight or flight response, and we are just operating as if there is a threat and we are being attacked. But the truth is, when people have defensive personalities, they perceive that they are being attacked a lot of times when they're not. Now, what in these moments should you consider doing with someone who does get defensive with you when you bring something up? Number one rule, do not say you are getting defensive or say, don't get defensive. People who are getting defensive, first of all, they usually have heard that feedback for years by many people. And most people who are defensive personalities know that they can get defensive. You don't need to diagnose them. You don't need to tell them that. In fact, that will just bother them more. So do not use the word defensive. Don't tell them what they're doing. A few simple things that you can do in the moment when the person gets defensive: pause. Pause, pause, pause. Make sure your own emotional volume button stays low because nothing good happens when two people both get negative emotion volume buttons turned up. One simple distraction technique that you can use when the other person has gotten defensive and upset, and all of a sudden it's a really awkward moment between the two of you. Look at something in the environment. Take your eyes and actually look at something in the environment as a distraction and actually notice a few different details about it. Something concrete to distract you from hooking on too much to what is happening in that moment so that you don't get too upset. So, one example would be, I'm picturing myself, the other person has gotten defensive, and I think, okay, try a distraction technique. I look for something in the room. Right now, I come to a lamp. It has a blue shade. It has a white base. I would say it's maybe a medium size lamp. Okay. Now I can look back to the individual that I am talking to in this discussion that has gotten defensive. And I actually feel like I paused the moment. The last 5 or 10 seconds, I didn't get upset with the defensive person. So that's a good thing. A little technique. Taking your eyes and focusing your eyes on something in the environment and noticing a few details about it can help you avoid, in those 15 seconds or so, getting really upset, getting hooked into a big emotional whirlwind of defensiveness with the other person. Sometimes you can also remove yourself from the situation and say something like this: you know what? Can you just give me a moment to kind of put my thoughts together? Because sometimes if things happen too fast, then I sometimes am not really sure what exactly is the next thing I should say or do. And so just give me a second. I hope that's okay. You can see by my facial expression when I said that I was in a role play with the defensive person, and that can actually help in this situation because I didn't seem aggressive. I didn't seem threatening. I didn't seem like I was in battle with them. I actually just very specifically told them what I need. Just give me a moment, and I might need to, just walk away for a minute and come back. Or if it's on the phone, I may just try to call them back in a few minutes. But a break where you have a minute to kind of gather your thoughts can be really helpful. Another thing that you can do is you can say, you know what, maybe now isn't a great time to talk about it. And maybe we can just check in a little bit later. I'm sure we can figure it out. That's something that you can do. And then you can ask them, is there later today? I don't know. Do you have any time, maybe around like 6 or 7 o'clock this evening? Would that be a time maybe we could just take a few minutes and talk about it? Or maybe tomorrow? Now, a lot of times when you say to the defensive person in that moment where they've gotten upset and defensive, when you bring up, well, we can talk about it later if you want, a lot of times you know exactly what they may say to you. They may say something like, no, we can talk about it right now. Let's talk about it right now. Well, actually, you have a choice too, as a member of that relationship, whether it's a relationship at work or in your personal life. You have a right too to determine when you want to talk about it. So the truth is, you probably don't really want to talk about it in a moment where they've gotten really upset and defensive, right? Because you probably don't want to get upset. You don't want to have an argument. So just because the other person says they want to talk about it right now doesn't mean that you are going to talk about it right now with them. You may actually need some time. And so, one way that you can respond to that is to say something along the lines of, I hear you, but you know what? I think for me, it's something that I would rather us talk about a little bit later. I care about you. And again, I know we can figure this out. What's really important about the way that I just said that is I didn't say anything again in a threatening way. I didn't create any fear in them that, maybe I was going to punish them in some way, that maybe I was going to be angry or give them the silent treatment. No, in fact, I said, we can figure it out. So I left them by planting that seed of the reminder, the compromise is what I really want here. And a lot of times, what people just need is a little time to go to their own corner and regroup. And then later, things can really be kind of worked out in a better non emotional way. So I hope this video has been helpful. If it has, please like the video. That way, you give me information about what is helpful to you. If you'd like to go deeper on this topic or other topics, you can check out my podcast, Insight with Dr. Seth. Have a good day, everyone.